Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. We'll be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this super special live episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, recorded here in Phoenix at the DisruptED Summit, put on by Collegis Education. So if you follow along over the next several episodes that we'll put out are all recorded live here with a bunch of great people from the Collegis team, partners, and other folks that are just in attendance here. So really excited to have a wide array of conversations with folks. But this is the first one to kind of place it in time and space, because I think other folks will be like reflecting on the day as we're going through. But we're kicking the day off first thing here with Dan and Jeff. Dan, you've been on the show before. Folks have followed along. Love talking to you before. Excited to have you back. But just in case folks don't know, if both of you could kind of briefly introduce yourselves, your roles at Collegis, and just kind of your background, and then we'll kind of get more into our conversation here today.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. Thanks for having me again, Dustin. So Dan Antonson, AVP Analytics Technology Solutions with Collegis. I've been with the organization now, I think 12 years. I originally started more in the technical analytics side in marketing and attribution. And just as I kind of built up the practice, built teams, and kind of expanded the role in what our team's contributions were and are. And now I lead a team of data engineers and solution architects who are really just helping schools collect the data that they need from the systems, connect and integrate it together, and then activate on that data. And activation can be things like reports, dashboards, insights, but more increasingly now it's about AI applications and how do we get data from one system to power those applications. So that's one side of my role, and then the other side is leading the systems thinking practice. So I sit down with a lot of schools, and through whiteboards and Post-its and Sharpies, help them really kind of map out their system so they can understand what they're working with and what the leverage points are for driving the impact that they're after.
I do feel like you are known for your visual representations of systems and things. And
I think in Post-it notes now, I can't help it. I just bring them everywhere. They go through the wash. I find them later. Yes, I call it my party trick. Is my whiteboard. So.
Yeah. It's because I feel your reputation precedes you with that. I mentioned it in our prior interview, and then just other folks anecdotally, oh, you're talking Dan, and they mentioned it. But then even then, I just want to call out I love the title of solution architects. I feel like that's just kind of a new trend, I think, in terms of just organizations and how they sort of serve clients. That idea of that is a job to do that. So it's cool that you have a whole team of those folks that you work with. But Jeff, if you want to just briefly introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Vice President of Strategy and Solutions here at Collegis. And Dustin, thanks for having us on. My role at Collegis, I head up our marketing, our corporate marketing. So my team's in charge of attracting interest from colleges and universities to talk to Collegis and see if there's a there. My team also supports the some of our business development efforts and our efforts with our current partners. So Dan's part of that group, and I oversee a group of solution architects. And I've been with Collegis for 16 years now. Background in MarTech, and had a ton of roles here. And Dan and I have been working together for all 12 of those.
All 12.
So happy to be on and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think just to kind of ground our conversation, the topic here will be kind of focusing in, exploring, explaining Connected Core, which is going to be new to me as well. I'm excited to kind of learn more about it. Again, interacting with you and then just sort of following your team's work, I've always just been really just fascinated, impressed, and just it's really cool, I think, what you do and how you serve clients. So if you want to explain like what that is in particular, like what prompted you all to create it and just like context and backstory, because I'm assuming that that'll be kind of a great way for folks if they're not familiar with their work to kind of get a good kind of snapshot into it. And we'll use that to kind of guide the rest of our conversation here.
Sure. Yeah, so Connected Core is really our data platform for integration and automating data workflows. And it's something we had to kind of build, I think, really out of necessity as we were working with our colleges and university partners. They would have different CRM systems. Sometimes it would be multiple systems, SISs, web analytics systems, website systems, and really where we saw the need and opportunity was to really help them stitch those components and those kind of data pieces together. So the platform has a few different components, but I think the easiest way to explain it is there's a kind of data warehouse kind of at the core, but from that warehouse we have these, think of them as almost activations, these kind of data products that sit on top of that. The two that we've been talking to schools the most about, especially lately, is what we refer to as workflows, which is helping schools automate data workloads, not just in a reporting context, but how do I take data from this system, from our web analytics system, combine it with CRM data, and then have a personalized output, an email, an early alert. So think about it as workflows that are really kind of actioning on the data, but also orchestrating those different kind of components. And then the other kind of component of that workflow, one of our data products is what we call the digital twin. And what the digital twin is it's a composed profile of an individual prospective student, a learner. And it's really all of the attributes and kind of metadata pieces from the systems that a school has. So think CRMs, learning management systems, and we stitch that together and we build a profile that can then be used within that kind of workflow automation. But that's the simplest way I would describe it. But there's probably a simpler way to do it. Jeff, anything you would add?
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the student digital twin because that's kind of an intriguing term there. But again, I think, from your perspective, sort of the origin story or just sort of like, those sort of things. Yeah.
Again, necessity was the mother of invention here. So Collegis, back when this was getting developed, we spent a lot of our time working with colleges and universities on the marketing and enrollment side, and the data was just all over the place. You've got different teams, siloed data, people are reporting one thing, and then in another department it's something else, and we couldn't actually execute our work very well unless we could get that data pulled together, make some good decisions. I mean, you're managing large media budgets in some cases, and you got to make the right calls there. So it started there, and we've evolved the thing into more, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but it's really more about the student experience and leveraging technology to create student experiences that students care about. There's a great article that came out called Higher Ed's Netflix Moment. And I should remember the author, but I don't. But look it up. It really talks about how student expectations are in a world of Amazon and Netflix and doing everything off your phone on an app. Like, there's an expectation of self-service out there. And with AI coming on, and with Dan talked about workflows, and we can unpack that a little bit. But if you've got the right data in our Connected Core in the Collegis world, and you're modeling it the right way, which is, think of that as our digital twin that we'll talk about, and then you're leveraging AI and automation, all of a sudden you have the foundation to create a really powerful, personalized, self-service experience, whether that's for recruitment or retention or wherever a student is engaging with the university. So that's our vision, and you can think about Connected Core as sort of the hub of all that.
Yeah, and that's why I think I've always been kind of fascinated with your all's work. One, just like the way that you obviously like visualize things and can kind of convey the points, but like the idea that it is honoring, I think, the sort of aspirations or hopes or dreams, the idea of like, we have all these amazing tools, like it should be able to work better together. And whether that's, you do something custom or, certainly if some folks kind of just like do without and they're like, well, according to us, this is, how we see it or whatever. And they kind of have to like muscle through that. But I think we're at that point where there needs to be, solutions to that, whether you're kind of deliberately like buying into sort of like a whole suite of things that can kind of do all the things or whatever. But I think you all, I mean, really committed to like higher education, kind of tailor making it for that, and even the idea of that it, from what you're saying, has sort of applicability kind of across the whole life cycle versus it being like, oh, we like, hyper tailored this to like one specific use case to like integrate data together for recruitment, and that's it. It doesn't really do anything else for that. Like even that sort of like, that you all kind of serve across everything, like it. I think that is also, I think what increasingly will happen in the near future is that like everything does seem like more comprehensive versus just like, because I think you could extrapolate from like one department, is doing things kind of their own way, or just sort of one kind of, marketing and recruitment, retention, alumni, like they might kind of have their own sort of like, ecosystems that they play in. It's like increasingly you're going to need like really tightly interwoven across that whole time. And certainly partially for like student demand, and preferences and needs and that sort of thing, but also just like, the urgency of this moment sort of demands more, kind of seamless, kind of smart data integration and to kind of maximize the investments that institutions have been making in all these tools over the past several years.
And I can give you a really quick example too of one that I think even just in single departments, there's opportunity to really start to like just like think differently about the data and bring it together in a way that's like meaningful for the front lines. So I was doing one of the signature whiteboard exercises around student success, and as we were kind of process mapping and inventorying the tools, a question I asked was, okay, how many browser tabs? So if you identify a student, how many browser tabs do you have up to try to like triangulate where this learner might be struggling? Right? Because they might see in one system like, oh, the grades are falling off, but why? Well, now I have to go look in the learning management system. Have they logged in recently? Well, what type of student is this? Now I have to go to the CRM system. Oh, we have an engagement tool that's sending out communications and surveys. And so ultimately, this group of student success coaches, they're like, oh, yeah, I just live in a browser. I call it the tabyrinth. Right? It's just like endless tabs, right? And so to me, it's like there's this Netflix self-serve expectation, but there's also support staff and people who want to help students improve their lives through education. And it's like we have kind of appified the all of the different kind of pieces to a point where it's like starting to kind of like crumble around the edges, and that makes a difference to students. Like these student success coaches are spending more time on the administrative burden of all of their applications than actually building relationships with students, and that's crazy to me. So that's what we're thinking about.
Yeah. And that's a symptom of a broader issue in higher ed. So if you think about data and people that are doing things with data on a campus, you have someone who's a CRM administrator, and you have some IT folks, and you've got marketing, and you've got marketing working with vendors, and you've got advancement working with, you have all these data sinks sitting there. And when you think about centralizing that, Dustin, I think you made a good point. Like this is a moment in time where higher ed's got to start thinking of data as a central function of the university, and it's not. And so what happens is, Dan mentioned appified. So these individual departments say, "Ooh, AI, I need an app for that in my marketing little world corner of the universe, or my recruitment corner of the universe." And all of a sudden the tech ecosystem starts to get this layer, this halo of applications around it. And it just creates more mess. And that's a challenge for Collegis in that we're going in and saying, hey, you got to look at this broadly, and you got to look at this long-term as a strategic move for you. And it's hard when data is just decentralized and sitting off in all corners of the university.
Yeah, and I guess to make it clear, I guess from my point of view, and I guess I'm sort of assuming this from what you all are saying, like there is sort of a version where it may be that you use like one tool to rule them all across the student life cycle, and that could make things easier. But it could also just be like, okay, like you've got stuff that you use and you like it, and then let's make sure that it all sort of like, gets connected through this hub and things are flowing back and forth, whatever. So I think just to make that clear, where it's not, one only way, where it needs to be like, one sort of massive tool and, used across every sort of department and all that. It's just sort of like making things work better together.
That's not our approach. There are companies out there that promise the one app to rule them all, or one tool to rule them all. So the connected core, think of that as the the hub, or where we're pulling from the systems that an institution is using. We're not replacing, right? We're pulling it, and then the idea is you got to get the data cleaned up. And this is just roll up the sleeves, dirty work that that we're really good at, and then you're creating data models off of that, and then doing things with that. But the idea of like, oh, there's this big plug and replace with this one tool. I think ERPs were kind of positioned that way years back. That's a fool's errand, in my opinion.
Well, to kind of just continue to explore this like more specifically, let's talk more about the student digital twin, just like kind of what that is, why it's important. So Dan, if you want to kind of take that first.
Yeah, you bet. So think of the digital twin as almost akin to like a customer data profile, which is kind of an industry term that was in marketing, where we're going to build profiles to better understand our audiences, our segmentation, like how do we message to people, how do we reach them, how do we advertise, all of those different kind of components. And I think when customer data profiles and platforms have been around for a long time, but I think they were a bit almost ahead of their time, where the technology hadn't really caught up in a way that made those scale and as useful as they are today, especially with AI. So in the past days of customer data platforms, you'd build these like kind of logic-based rules for audience creation, and those rules just kind of crumble under their own weight. They get hard to manage, and then people aren't updating or paying attention, and the whole thing kind of implodes. The digital twin is kind of a take on a customer data profile for higher education. So we typically start with the base of like CRM style data, learning management system, student information system style data, and we build an endpoint, a service layer that we can then use as an integration point between different systems. So we use the digital twin for our own recruitment efforts when we lean in to help schools do outreach to students. Instead of us logging into our partner CRM, we use the digital twin data model to power some of our own outreach tools while still making sure that their data is centralized and is their own. But every school has, we've tried to standardize the data model as much as we can. But of course, every school has like different nuances in the way that they categorize things. So we've tried to make it as flexible as it can be to help with some of those edge use cases. But I also don't want to pretend that this is the first time that somebody has tried to make a higher education data model. If you are familiar with Salesforce, there's EDA, the education data architecture, which is great, but those are operations models. They're really intended to be kind of transactional in the way that a CRM works, right? You're kind of checking boxes and adding notes. The digital twin is not, it doesn't capture data. It's a service to serve up the data that we have. And that profile gets built out over time. So there's no necessarily finish line and like, congratulations, your digital twin is complete. It's what is the use case? What are we trying to impact today? And what are the sources we need to layer in? So one example just in marketing and enrollment that a lot of schools will get started with is really just attribution. Like what are the touch points that lead up to the point of enrollment? And so that's like taking sources like Google Analytics, combining it with Slate data, with Salesforce, with Ellucian. And sometimes those CRMs will have their own kind of components. So there might be Marketo, there might be Pardot. If it's Slate, we might have Ping data we can use. If it's Element 451, there's things that we can use there too. And so we really like to consider ourselves as technology agnostic, and the digital twin really kind of gives us a framework to really like be true to that ethos. And we want schools to own their data. We certainly when it comes to just privacy and security, like we meet all of those like SOC standards, but with privacy and some of the inevitable ethical components of that, we work with schools to give a point of view, but ultimately leave it to the school to decide what type of data are we bringing in and how is it going to be used. So, but it's really exciting. I started my career in kind of classic digital analytics, and I think we always saw the potential of all of this technology coming together. It's been really exciting to kind of be on the front lines of that and to really start to bring that original vision to life now. So it's been a lot of fun to build.
Yeah, because I even think just that like pretty clear, simple, compelling, relevant example of like attribution of a prospective student as they're going, like there is kind of like a fog of war, certainly, because it is like, different if it's like you're an enrolled student at this institution using our systems with your single sign-on, whatever, you can kind of like, track all that a little bit easier. There's still obviously a huge opportunity to sort of like, interweave that a lot more clearly. But when they're sort of just interacting with like different ads, emails, like this, that, the other, there is often like, well, we knew the last thing they did before they like, submitted an RFI form or put their application in or whatever else. Like, so I think that is like that idea if you, can kind of plug in, augment, sort of clear all the pipes and get everything going or whatever, these institutional leaders can, in that sort of use case, really much better know, what's an effective use of our dollars here. Like, wow, our community does really, resonate with this platform or this kind of message on that platform or this kind of timing or whatever else versus it being maybe, anecdotal or just sort of like, oh, well, from my point of view, I can see this and that was the highest performing thing or whatever. But it's like, yeah, but like that doesn't really like drive, that's them sort of like meandering around. It doesn't really like, maybe drive like kind of compelling or relevant or necessary action, that we want to see or something. But I mean, it is really exciting because I think, it's the idea of like, I think AI is being sort of a tailwind to these efforts that, like you're saying, like it's like people have been kind of working on this sort of again, like aspiration or so, this idea that's like, we know this is possible, let's keep working at it. And it's been this sort of accelerant, I think, to really manifest it more.
So like as just a yes and to that is it's content groupings on a website. So websites in higher education, they're huge, they're enormous, there is so much content and so many different places people can go and explore. And in the past, when it comes to content, we would try to use like rules-based categorization. But then the website would change, and then all of a sudden those groups, that logic wouldn't be accurate anymore. Well, AI kind of flips the script on that because you can let AI categorize and maintain that, and then those categories can then get layered into the digital twin model. Because what happens, like if you wanted to see all the pages and interactions, I mean, Slate Ping has this data already, but you look through it and it's this huge long list of all of these interactions, and it's kind of like, well, what do I do with this? Versus, with AI now we can start to summarize those interactions, we can categorize them, and even just connecting students to the proper support channels is just something that is so much more reasonable to achieve that it's kind of accelerating the build out of this, but also making it just like tremendously more useful than it's ever been.
Well, and I wanted to put a question to you that I put in here because you'd kind of mentioned the sort of like data cleanup piece or whatever, because I think in my mind stuff like this, because again it's been this sort of like long-term aspiration, or it feels like too good to be true or something, or like I think I've talked to a lot of people around like, that data cleanliness piece and stuff, and they might think that like, oh my gosh, I would love to do that, but I've got to like make my data pristine before we even start to think about trying to do this. But you had mentioned like, like it is sort of like, this kind of tedious work or, hard kind of, at times it can be kind of labor intensive work, but like that you all are like good at it and that sort of thing. So if you want to like speak to that, because I think that is something where like people would be like, absolutely, that all sounds great. But like either, too good to be true, or we're going to have to like do all this stuff before we even like think about, embarking on this journey. Just curious if you've had like interactions like that, or sort of just like your perspective on that sort of notion, because I think that's the sort of like dilemma, is the acknowledgement and sort of acceptance of like, this is important work that we need to do, but like they might be apprehensive to it or something for those reasons.
It's a great question. It's kind of a dilemma in that we go in and we'll talk to our partners and prospective partners, and you're really talking about like, here's where it's going, right? I mean, with AI and automation and all of these things, like, and we believe this is the future of student engagement, or you name it in terms of technology and the student experience. The hard part is, hey, it's a mess, right? And so you got to get folks kind of over that hump, like, hey, we need a little time to get things squared away here, all right? And typically, and Dan, I'll defer to you, but there really isn't a whole lot of scenarios that we haven't seen. So we've really built up the muscles to clean the data, do it much more quickly and efficiently than we have in years past, because you got to get to value quickly, right, in this space, because the next recruiting cycle is coming or the next thing is coming. So those are muscles that don't often get celebrated, but they're really important, because you can't do anything unless you're working off a single data source. Yeah, you can slap some AI on that and maybe get a little business intelligence. But if you're looking at multiple data sources, website, CRM, SIS, LMS, if you're looking at all of that, that's some lifting to actually clean that up and create that digital twin, which another way to think of digital twin is just an individual student profile across the student life cycle, right? One view.
Yeah. I mean, it's data governance, and data governance takes persistence, and it's oftentimes a people process, right? So just even think of your marketing campaigns. How do we name our campaigns? So when we do look at the data, we know what we're looking at. And if you have, different departments in undergrad, grad, and online who are doing their separate efforts, it's really difficult to get that all kind of working on the same, singing from the same songbook. But as Jeff said, it's kind of a process, a muscle that we've grown over time just to kind of facilitate those conversations with, okay, what are we trying to achieve? Doing the inventory, not attacking or saying anybody did anything wrong, but it's just like, okay, how do we get the train cars back on the tracks? And if you can show the value of that quickly just to those individuals, they tend to get behind the effort. So it's data governance and change management, which just aren't, unfortunately, there's no magic button for either one of those.
Yeah. But yeah, a good call out that those are kind of two of the, just sort of like cultural pieces that are, an important element in all this. But because I think for me, what's been very refreshing having kind of similar conversations with folks in the space is like that we're at a point now, I think the acknowledgement of like the data cleanliness, the importance of it, but then like, the idea of like you might have all these disparate systems and whatever else. It's like, the organizations that are partnering with institutions to do this work can really be like, come as you are, like we will help you, like we could be of service there, like let us help you. Because again, like this moment demands action, the idea of like get started today so that, you're kind of reaping the benefits for the next admission cycle or, helping your retention as soon as possible or whatever else. So, because that's, kind of a mantra I always have in these conversations to like start somewhere, like that idea of knowing that it's like, okay, we're going to have to do a lot of work on the, cleaning up the data. Like better to start now than like put it off and, further delay like the benefits and everything. So with all of that being said, I'm going to wrap up every conversation that we're having here, as I often do, like with the podcast, of just trying to get people's kind of like final thoughts, calls to action. But like, I'll put a finer point on it for this is your bits of advice for other leaders navigating this moment. It could be just one or, I'll allow a few, but like all this stuff, obviously, that we've talked about, if it's sort of relevant to that or more sort of like existential, for this moment for higher ed, advice for other leaders navigating this moment.
Yeah, I would say you have to define what you want to impact, right? We see a lot of, hey, we're going to put in a data warehouse. And it sort of gets lobbed over to IT and the CIOs, like goes through a selection process, and then it just dies on the vine out there, right? And then you have this technical debt sitting there. And what we're really pushing is what are you trying to do as an institution, and what in the data world is holding you back? And it invariably leads to let's get things centralized, let's clean things up, and then let's start with the use cases that matter. So the advice I would give is think about a multi-year data strategy. And that's hard because of the point we talked about earlier. There's no central data function, right? And maybe universities should really start considering a centralized data function.
Get a chief data officer or something.
Right. Yeah. We're seeing a few of them here and there, but not very many. But the idea of like, all right, you have a data strategy, you've got centralized governance, centralized leadership. All of a sudden, data now becomes, because oftentimes it's, we got to fix this problem, and the problem they're really talking about is like we need better reports. right? We need better reporting so we can make better decisions, which is totally valid because there's a lot of bad data out there. But more visionary looking forward, we're trying to hammer the drum on, you got to get on this bus and you got to clean things up and you got to take advantage of AI and you got to take advantage of automation because the students are going to demand it. They are demanding it. And so I think there's going to be the haves and the have-nots. And the ones that don't actually get serious about this and start investing in data are going to be, at a competitive disadvantage if they don't get in the race.
The impact, starting with impact, what's the problem? Absolutely. And then to build on that as well, I would say schools really need to be taking a hard look at just the leverage points to make those things happen. And what I mean by that is, where's the funding coming from this? Where, like, most schools don't have, piles of investment laying around to be able to invest. So and that requires trade-offs, right? So what are we going to stop doing, or what are we going to reallocate? And what does this look like? And so I think it's very much about defining where we want to go. What are we trying to improve? What are we trying to impact? Don't just do a data warehouse for the sake of doing a data warehouse. Tie that to an objective and be really clear about that. And a lot of schools have that started in their strategic plan. Here's where we're trying to go. But then it's taking a step back and saying, okay, if digital transformation to support student success is on the list, where is that coming from? And that's really about identifying the leverage points ahead of time as you're solving those problems.
Yeah. Great bits of advice. I think definitely the things that folks should be thinking about if they are looking into starting on a journey such as this, an important one, but a lot of things to kind of keep in mind. And I just appreciate you all for joining me for this conversation, sharing all that you did, and appreciate you all for checking out this episode, and for Collegis for hosting us here, and for ASU for hosting us here as well. So thank you all so much for having this conversation.
Great. Thanks, Des.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.